Yeah, Jim Buchanan.
Has joined the conference.
We'll be starting in a minute or two.
Thank you.
You're right. He could still be. When you kill your uncle with an aircraft gun, it sort of sends a strong message. Oh, yeah, you're stuffing your water, huh? Your energy drink?
My Mio.
Oh, your Mio. Oh, gee, never mind. I'm the wrong guy for that.
No, I did that Tuesday night because I'm trying to do the lower carb thing. No, skip the beers, stay with the distills. I had one too many Crown. I was not feeling good yesterday. I was tired. Yeah, because my Crown and waters, I just put them in there. I haven't let that much Crown in it.
Oh, yeah.
It goes down so smooth. You want me to boost you?
Yeah. President.
I didn't ask yet. If I could ask everybody to have a seat and quiet down, we're ready to begin with the Finance Committee. So you know, we do audio and video record our meetings. So I ask the board members to kindly remember to hit your button when you have something to say on the record and press it when you're finished. We do have a limited number of active mics at any given time, so we don't want to miss anything important. So I will now turn it over to Finance Chair McGallis.
Thank you. I'd like to call the RTA Finance Committee meeting to order. Would the Secretary please call the roll?
Director Anderson? Director Buchanan?
Here.
Participating by phone, having completed the required paperwork. Director Colson?
Here.
Director DeWitt?
Here.
Director Lewis?
Here.
Director Melvin? Director Troiani?
Here.
Director McGallis?
Here.
We have a quorum of 5 present with 2 absent. I'm sorry, we have a quorum of 6 present and 2 absent.
Thank you. Item number 2 is approval of the minutes
Oh,
from...
sorry, Director McGillis. Let me just also add that Directors Frega, Fuentes, Higgins, Hobson, and Ross are also present.
Thank you. Item 2 is the approval of the minutes from the meeting held March 16th, 2017. Do we have any questions or comments about the minutes? If not, could we have a motion to approve? Motion by Director DeWitt, second by Director Lewis. Roll call.
Director Buchanan,
Aye.
Director Colson, Director DeWitt, Director Lewis,
Aye.
Director Troiani,
Aye.
Director McGillis,
Aye.
6 ayes and 2 absent.
Thank you. Item 3A is report of the monthly financial results for February 17. B?
Good morning. As you can see, our dashboard here is very colorful today. We'll talk about that a little bit. So we're reviewing the Service Board financial results through February of 2017. Although expenses continue to perform well, revenue has been significantly impacted by lower ridership, a tentative reduction in state funding for reduced fare programs, and the weakening sales tax. So the size of the Chicago area labor force decreased by about 12,000 in February, while employment increased by about 7,000 jobs. This resulted in a sharp decrease in the regional unemployment rate to 5.2%. So it's narrowing the gap with the national unemployment rate of 4.7. But please note that the regional unemployment rate has decreased over the last year primarily due to contraction of the size of the labor force. So it's fewer workers rather than more jobs. Let's look at system ridership. So through February, it was 1.9% lower than budget, as shown by the orange bars. Oh, let's get that up. Sorry. As shown by the orange bars on the chart. Both January and February ridership decreased from prior year, and the total ridership has now decreased by 4.8% from 2016. Going back to the summary table, each service board except Metro reported ridership results below budgeted levels. As indicated by the red boxes, Pace Suburban Service ridership was 7.6% unfavorable to budget, and ADA paratransit ridership was 7.9% unfavorable. The Suburban Service and ADA budgets both assumed ridership gains for 2017, but both services have thus far lost ridership on a year-over-year basis, with Pace down by 5.2% and ADA 4.4% lower than through February. Let's look at operating revenue. So that was $6.4 million, or 3.7% unfavorable to budget, and that's also highlighted in red. The shortfall is due from the combined effect of unfavorable fare revenue and the lower level of reduced fare reimbursement currently appropriated in the incomplete state fiscal year budget for 2017. CTA has been most heavily impacted by the reduction in reduced fare reimbursement, while Pace Suburban Service has the largest fare revenue shortfall due to the lagging ridership. Both are highlighted in red. ADA paratransit operating revenue was 11.2% unfavorable, also highlighted. This is due to the lower ridership and also delayed state payment of Medicaid reimbursements totaling $200,000 through February. I think Director Lewis and Director Ross had asked about this last month. But these are delays and they're timing differences rather than cuts. They do come, it just takes a while. Medicaid reimbursements represent about 2/3 of the total ADA operating revenue shortfall, with fare revenue accounting for the remaining third. Looking at the public funding section of the dashboard, that shows a shortfall from budget of 2.5% for the region, with unfavorable results for each service board, including Pace ADA. This includes our initial projection of January sales tax, which was 2% higher than prior year, but 2% lower than budget. The 2.9% ADA paratransit shortfall is due to the lower accrual of the state ADA paratransit funding, which the stopgap budget deal reduced from $8.5 million to $3.825 million for each of the state fiscal years 2016 and 2017. The only thing that looks good are the expenses here. System-wide operating expenses for February were $11.4 million, or 2.5% favorable to budget, with each service board representing favorable results. As we said last month, what's also helped is, of course, the relatively snow-free winter, helping the service boards keep expenses in check. But they are very conservative when it comes to their expenses. They continue to tweak them throughout the year as they see that revenue is impacted or ridership is impacted. Pace Suburban Service has had a 7.6 favorable to budget expense performance highlighted in light blue, and this is primarily due to administration savings of $1.5 million. At the regional level, the favorable operating expenses did not quite offset the unfavorable operating revenue and public funding, so it produced a net result which was $0.8 million unfavorable to budget. Pace Suburban Service has a favorable net result in excess of 3%, also highlighted in blue due to good expense performance, while ADA Paratransit had an unfavorable result, also due to low operating revenue and state funding. This unfavorable ADA result is expected to improve due to lower expenses in the coming month. So looking at it through February, the regional recovery ratio is unfavorable to budget by 0.4 percentage points. This is again due to the unfavorable fare revenue as well as the reduced fare reimbursement funding. The fare revenue recovery ratio of 33.3% includes passenger fare revenue only and is down 0.2% from last month's report. When you look at ancillary service board revenue, the recovery ratio increases to 38.4 for the year through February, but that's also down from prior month. So in the right section, we show the statutory recovery ratio of 45.7%, and that's labeled with credits. CTA is most heavily impacted by the lower state reduced fare reimbursements since they provide most of those rides and receive that funding. This anticipated funding loss combined with lower fare revenue has driven CTA's recovery ratio 2.1 percentage points unfavorable to budget through February. So that, of course, impacts the regional recovery ratio and makes that unfavorable to budget. The shortfall is a concern, since you may recall that we adopted a budget that has only 0.2 percentage points cushion above the 50% for the full year. Expense performance needs to continue to be strong for the balance of the year in order to counteract the lower ridership we are experiencing and the assumed loss of the state reduced fare funding. Keep in mind that if we were to restore the reduced fare reimbursement to the full amount, so the $34 million, the system would be 0.3% favorable to budget through February rather than the 0.4% unfavorable that we're showing here. So we'll keep this in mind. We'll watch it very closely. Next month we do the state certifications. We will also include language in there that indicates, what's impacting the recovery ratio. As I touched upon earlier, the other area of concern is the sales tax. We obtain 4 or 5 sales tax projections, including a customized one. We go a middle of the road in our projection. But at this point, after 6 consecutive years of 4% or greater growth, the 2016 sales tax finished just 1.4 higher than 2015. So then the base for 2017 was calculated off of that higher projection, which we now may have to adjust, with significant weakness noted in both vehicle sales and department store sales. January 2017 is projected at about 2% growth. So we're going to continue to monitor sales tax very closely with the service boards, and we've recently requested an update forecast of the sales tax growth from our vendor Moody Analytics for the rest of 2017 as we look at the 2018 funding project. So in summary, we have some significant issues that we'll continue to monitor quite closely: ridership recovery ratio and now sales tax growth. And we'll keep you apprised as to the certification results next month. That concludes the presentation. Happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments by the members? Yes, Director Hobson.
I have 2. One, pace ridership. If you recall during the presentation when TJ was here presenting, I questioned them pretty hard about their ridership projections. They said that they were confident in their projections because of the bus on shoulder on I-90. Has that program begun?
There's various stages of initiation in the program. It has started. I know that they haven't yet kicked in all their marketing, so we don't have preliminary results yet at the RTA. By route, I should say. We have overall ridership. When
is the right time for PACE to revise their ridership projections? I realize this is only the 2nd month, but when is the appropriate time that they should adjust those ridership projections?
Last year we revised the projections probably mid-year. Was it about mid-year, Doug? So we will be talking to them about that.
Okay, and then, Farebox is also a very large concern of mine. And with CTA currently missing the mark by such a significant amount, when do their contingency plans kick in for improving the Farebox recovery?
Well, it's a regional issue. Certainly, it's not limited to one service board. Nevertheless, they are impacted the most by the reduced fare reduction. As you know, Director McGallis, we waived the fund to budget requirement. We also waived the regional reserve requirement. Again, this is something that the service boards requested and we agreed to. But in return, every year they file a fund balance reserve plan, which allows them to mitigate results of structural funding deficits. We will continue to provide a cushion or a buffer from state delays up to our short-term borrowing capacity, which we'll talk about on the next item, which is $400 million. Beyond that, they've got to tap into their reserves. Now, the reserves are not a permanent solution, right? It is something that provides a period of time where they would have to make adjustments in their expenses, service, or fares. And that takes a number of months because there's, of course, public input period and so forth. We certainly hope to not get to the point where we're all tapping into the reserves, but that is the plan or the program.
Thank you, B.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Yes, Director Lewis.
B, in the past we've talked about seasonality and when that might begin to impact the numbers. Could you refresh my memory again in terms of when the seasonality begins to have an impact on our numbers? I know there's a lag effect, but just want to refresh that.
Well, seasonality affects a number of things. Many of the service boards have done a much better job of doing their ridership projections based on seasonality rather than, take and divide by 12. Likewise, we do our budget projections that way. We know that, there's peak periods and certainly in the summer months and certain times winter, of course, can impact, ridership. And we do our projections that way. Our sales tax projections also have seasonality, right? There are periods of time. So all of those are impacted by seasonality. There are also lags in funding. The sales tax comes regularly. That is never delayed, but the Public Transportation Fund match, the PTF, that is lagged, and right now they're 9 months behind. No, they're 11 months behind on PTF and 9 months behind on the ASA and AFA, which is assisted funding support for debt service. That is the state who's late. So that, of course, all impacts, what's coming in and the impact on an individual month's dashboard projections. Did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Well, it was an answer, but I was just trying to understand. In looking at these numbers, I guess the first thing I was thinking was from a revenue perspective. They've done a great job on managing expenses, but you can't cut your way to prosperity. So I was just trying to determine whether or not there was any seasonal impacts that we should be taking into account from a revenue perspective that might flavor or influence the way we're looking at these numbers. Are the numbers already adjusted for seasonality, and it just represents the fact that revenues are coming up short of the mark relative to the plan?
I get the question now. So seasonality, we are already adjusted for seasonality based on our best guess and our projections from the service boards. So we are not hitting the budget seasonality already adjusted marks. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much, B.
Okay, thank you.
Item number 4 is an ordinance amending to 2016, a working cash notes direct placement. B?
What we're looking at here is we did a strategic financial plan, as you recall, a couple of years ago, and the recommendation was to look at a variety of borrowing tools for our tool belt, so that we would try to manage through the state delays in funding at the lowest possible cost. It's still costing a lot, as you know, Leanne reports on that. in her executive report, but we were trying to do, because it's unpredictable. And so what we're trying to do is have access to short-term borrowing, but if we don't use it, we wanted to pay less. So one of the recommendations was that we do a direct placement working cash notes that had used rates and unused rates. So the unused rate, of course, was lower, and we were successfully able to not use that for a period of time. In 2012, I know when I arrived here, we had the full $100 million out, and some was used, some wasn't used, but and we just had it out in case we needed it. So now we've been able to do a direct placement with the unused amount. So what this request is for is to increase, again, within the 400 cap, not increasing the maturity of the notes, which expire in January of 2018, but adding an additional $100 million to the existing $150 million to direct placement working cash notes with Wells Fargo under the same terms, same conditions. So this would add the other $100 million. Why do we need it? Well, you see what's going on with the state delay, and if we don't use it, we don't use it. One of the things that, we've been looking at is we continue to get our PTF money. We're just getting it slower, and it's taking longer. So if we don't use it, it sits there at the unused rate, which is 12 basis points over LIBOR. And if we use it, I don't recall what the, let's see, what is it? 48 basis points. So above LIBOR. So same rates, and this requests approval to enter this into this additional $100 million through January of 2018. Now we will have to come back in the fall and either refund all of these or go into new agreements, and they would be competitively bid, which is what this one was when it was done in January of 2016. It was competitively bid. So we will have to come back to you at the end of the year unless the state becomes current and pays us everything we owe. And it's only used for that. It's only used for state delays.
Thank you, Bea. I guess a couple of questions on it. The $400 million that they're behind in now, that's really gotten much larger than it had been, averaging maybe 350, less than that. Are we actively going after the state to get our reimbursement? Because at one time we had, when this first started, and we were really on top of it, we were constantly trying to get a drawdown from the state. Are we still doing that and just finding it much more difficult to get the money, or what? What's going on?
We routinely bill monthly for ASA and AFA. I mean, it's kind of funny because they're behind 9 months, but they just paid us through state fiscal year 2016, which ended in June of last year. So we were paid through that. We actively work with Jeremy, and we're constantly on it. But
it just seems like we're not getting any really distributions more often than we thought we should be getting, or we're used to getting, and it's kind of certainly increased considerably.
We received a payment in March, early March, and now our next payment is coming supposedly next week. We expect a payment next week, April. So yes, it's going, month and a half, 2 months.
And what is the actual percent, like an average? I said we have a cap of 13.5% on this money. What is an average for the year, for example, of say 2016 that we actually paid as far as a rate?
We paid, well, it depends on what LIBOR. It was 12 basis points plus 1 month of LIBOR. I'd have to look at that. I don't want to guess. And then the used portion was 48 basis points, so it totaled 146 basis points. Let me get that for you.
Okay.
But are you talking just in basis points, or do you want to know actually what it
He
cost
wants
us?
to
I
know
mean,
the interest.
yeah.
I
That's
wanted
the
the
interest
percentage that we're
Okay.
paying. We have a cap in the ordinance of 12.5.
We're nowhere near
12.50.
that. We will.
I'm just wondering, are we anywhere near that? I would hope not. So, okay.
We'll get that for you very quickly.
Thank you. And certainly this is something that we don't look forward to doing, but we really have been put in a situation until the revenues are delivered to us. We either have to do this or cut the budgets of the agencies, and that's not something that we went into the budget planning process intending to do. We intended to use working cash notes to keep the service boards whole as far as the budget as we approved. So this is meeting that goal. Nobody likes to pay the interest rates. That's now approaching close to $2 million for the year.
Right.
So, but it's a situation we're in. Other questions or comments? Director Hobson.
Yes, I would like to see, for the edification of the entire board here, the contingency plan of what levers get activated when, and what are the sequence of events should we bump up against our max number in the event that the state continues to be delinquent, and what that then triggers at the service boards and what their plans are. And just kind of like a little flow chart that everybody can understand the sequence of events. That would be very beneficial. Thank you.
We will request that from the service boards.
Other questions or comments? If not,
How much, question, how much in reserves do the service boards have right now in terms of months of operating?
It depends on each service board, obviously, because they have varying needs. But we asked them for a 3 to 4 month plan, which is what they told us they would need in order to implement, expense changes like fare increases, service reductions, or more significant expense reductions. So each of them have a plan for 3 to 4 months.
A plan, what about actual reserves?
Well, that's what the plan is.
I'd
It's
understood it was-
identifying funding that would be available to them from their own coffers that would be able to fill in that gap.
I had understood it was potentially 6 to 12 months. It's only 3 to 4.
No, it's 3 to 4. We had asked them originally, but they can implement those changes. It's really how much money do they need while they're able to implement changes in their expense structure, funding, or fares. And so they said they could do that within 3 to 4 months.
Is that cash or borrowing capacity or fare? Is it a mix of everything? What is cash reserve?
In their case, it would be cash reserves of different funds. In the case of CTA, they're the only ones that have a short-term borrowing ability, and they do not have it outstanding at this time.
Okay, so they all have 3 to 4 months cash, and CTA has
In
additional
reserves,
borrowing.
that doesn't mean, let me explain a couple of things. That doesn't mean that those funds are not, at this time, they're not restricted funds, but they're funds that may be budgeted toward other purposes that they would then have to tap into. It doesn't mean that people have, just it's sitting around. It may mean that they can tap into some of their different line items and secure that so that they're able to meet their requirements during this critical period. There's also actions that boards can take, whether their board or our board, to make available things like capital monies or other types of monies if an emergency is declared, and that's happened before, both at this board and at their boards.
When is the next reasonable opportunity for a state budget? I know that's obviously a loaded question, but they come back, I think, next week. Is there at least the chance that there's a budget in the next month, just in terms of when they're meeting and process?
I'm not the best person to answer. I'm going to defer to Jeremy.
Sure. Well, generally, budgets come at the end of the spring session, so May 31st is probably when we likely see a budget if one surfaces. Now, there's a question as to if one will surface, whether it'll be a full year, whether it'll be a partial budget, but May 31st is generally our target date.
And what would be the consequences of waiting to authorize this additional capacity until May 31?
Well, for example, we will have enough money to make the April, let's see, what is it? It's April, I'm sorry. We are making a PTF payment for the month of April to the service boards. We would be able to make, with that money that's coming, the month of May PTF. And then in June, we would not have money to make the PTF payment. So we again have committed to the service boards to make them whole. That's why we have that $400 million short-term borrowing cap. And I believe we should keep that commitment. But they understand that if the state money dries up and we use up this $100 million in a matter of a few months, we no longer can make that $30 million or so PTF payment that they receive every month.
Does this decision today create a little bit of a leverage moment with respect to CTA, for example, with respect to fare box recovery ratios. They're down about 2% from budget, so obviously we've been talking about how we want them to improve.
Right. So keep in mind that this money goes to all of the service boards, Metro, PACE, and CTA. And so they know, all of them know that we've got to meet the recovery ratio, whether it's through expense reduction, fare increases, or obviously full funding from the state. So I don't understand what you mean by leverage. I guess the way I would look at it is that those issues will have to be addressed, whether it's 1 month or 2 months or 3 months. But I think we should have this money so that we can make these PTF payments over the next few months. But that's certainly something that's typically addressed during budget season. Our business plan call is going to be issued in May. This board will approve it and review it, and I think that at that time we have to have discussions about all of this, right? Fares, recovery ratios, all of that.
I have one additional question. This may be better placed with Nadine. The statute here that could compel issuance of these notes, or the authority. Any read on that? There's some words in there about it has to be specifically contained within a budget. So
yeah, there's some
what does that
bizarre
mean?
language in the statute that actually allows other parties to compel us to issue bonds when needed. I mean, hopefully, I don't think that's ever been exercised in the past, to my knowledge. Hopefully, we won't get to that point, and we'll recognize when we need to issue, as we have, and come to this board and get the authority that we need to be able to meet those budget requirements.
Keep in mind, Director Higgins, too, that, as I said, there were $400 million out. I mean, I treat this like you borrow for your home. You don't go out and get it unless you need it. So we had only $150 million out for the longest time. Then we did the DP working class notes, and we only had about $10 million out of that. You know, we were paying the unused and then we paid the $10 million, and then we were paying only the unused rate at $150 million. It's just that's where we've been slowing it down, and what we want to do is more of a line of credit. We're trying to get authority to do that so that completely, well, there's of course issuance costs to start, but you don't pay for that if you don't use it. So we've been very conservative in how we've been borrowing, but we're there. I mean, the state owes $447 million, so we need to do this.
Thank you.
I think just real quick as a summary of what we're looking at, this is nothing that we didn't anticipate in the budget. I mean, we just recently went through a budget hearing, and we knew a couple of things. We knew that the state was continuing to have a delayed payment process to us. We knew that we had the cash reserve working note policy and so forth. So basically what we did, we put together a budget anticipating having to go out, unfortunately, if the state didn't come through with the money and bridge that gap. Some of us talked about the need to look at cutting the budgets because of the cost of borrowing. I mean, because we're spending like $2 million a year, and maybe we should be doing some cuts. So I think if members want to pursue, doing some kind of a new way of doing business, which I'm certainly not opposed to, that we would look at it during the budget process and we'd put together a plan that, hey, wait a minute, we're only going to issue $100 million, but we do it during a time when we can alert the service board so that they can put together a budget that would then comply with that change, or they would certainly have to show us in more detail how they're going to be able to live with the increased budget. So I guess at the point that we're at today, we do have a budget that we passed. We did anticipate shortfall, certainly not $400 million. We've been there before at 400, but so all I would recommend is that we move forward so that the service boards are not disrupted, and that we borrow, and then if we want to address this issue during the budget, that's the time to do it, and see if we got the votes to do it, if we want to make changes. So,
Director McAllis, you'll recall that for about 3 years, this budget group submitted a plan to repay the existing working cash notes. Remember, at the rate of
we've been all over the place
maybe
on
$5 million. Well, because we owe $400 million, so unless the state gets current, we need to pay that back. And that's why we reissue in December to roll over those notes, and we couldn't get the votes to pass that, and so we need to pay those notes down either through state becoming current or some other plan, but that comes out of the non-formulaic funding. So we either got to agree to that, or we're going to keep rolling them over until the state gets current.
All right, and this does require an extraordinary vote on this particular issue, so, Mr. Chairman.
I think this issue is now on the radar screen, at least with the legislative leaders, where I'm not quite sure they realize that there's a cost to the RTA for us to borrow. But Senator Cullerton, the Senate President, in a speech the Friday before last at Elmhurst College, actually said that the RTA, unlike vendors, incurs a cost for the state's delay, and the Senate President actually put it in his speech that it costs the RTA money, that the state is slow in payment. And Jeremy, so is it the comptroller or the treasurer we go to beg for our monies?
The comptroller is in charge of distributions.
Well, maybe Susanna Mendoza is new. Maybe we should. I'll be down there. We should just go in and just kind of have if you haven't already, just have a meeting with her and say, hey, this is important, and she just to educate her on the issue.
Yeah, we can do that. We are in constant contact. Every 2 weeks or so, we have a call with the comptroller's office. But
we should probably go see her herself. And I had lunch yesterday with the state treasurer, Mark Fergs. We were just talking about things, and I actually brought this up. And I don't think they don't get into that level of detail. They have so many things on their platter. But I think he was surprised that we don't get paid interest for the delay. It's for us, it's the double whammy, because I think the state legislators and the state leaders are so used to reading that it costs the state extra money because they pay interest to vendors. Well, they're not paying interest to us, and we actually incur a cost. And I think that's news to some of these folks that are out there. And I guess my last question is, and I should dive into this more. So what do they do with our money, Jeremy? Are they using it to pay schools, or what pool of money are they? Who they using our money to pay?
I mean, in our conversations, my understanding is there's literally at times no money in the state coffers, and so we make calls. We say we'd like a scheduled payment in the next couple of weeks. They get back to us and say it's probably going to be a month. Those are the kind of conversations we're having.
So they merge our PTF funds with general funds of the state? I'm just trying to figure out what they're doing with it.
All the funds come from the General Revenue Fund. They're transferred into the PTF fund prior to distribution. So they're all GRF funds.
Yeah. As I've always kidded Director Friga, not kidded, I'm serious. You have to understand we're in a arm wrestling battle with hospitals and nursing homes and some very, very sympathetic causes, including schools. We're important. We move working people and students by the millions every day. But you got to understand the environment of who we're up against, including some daycare providers and others that have very compelling, having sat in those seats of a legislature, very compelling interest. And when they're saying we're going to shut down, in fact, I just got word yesterday, 100-year-old not-for-profit group in the city of Chicago is closing down because they can't function anymore. I mean, it's sad. So just you have to understand our environment. But let's go see Comptroller Mendoza and probably Mike Fergs as well, just so they understand. And I thank the Senate President for at least starting to make our case for us that this does cost money. And I think he said in his speech, the way he put it, is the borrowing costs each year are approaching perhaps the cost of an elevated car. They're not at the $4 million mark where it would be a Metric car, but I think he said it's about the cost of a car for the L, that we could have another new car if we didn't have to go out and borrow this money. And I get his point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Director Hobson.
I had a question. This may be for Jeremy or for Chairman Dillard. Is there, I'm assuming the risk is low, but is there any risk that the legislation won't be approved for the $400 million next time it comes around for our borrowing capacity?
Answer that one. Give them that
I guess I would say there's always a risk, but it's passed out of committee thus far. It's on the House floor. It's moving along. It's June 2018 is our expiration date, so we do have some time, but at this point we anticipate it passing.
And it's still for $400 million. They're not increasing our limit and anticipating that we would go into additional borrowing.
Correct. It's for $400 million. There's an amendment on the bill that would allow us to pursue a line of credit as well, but right now it's set at $400 million.
Okay, thank you.
But
keep in mind too, it's been
my point there
removed.
is, I'm sorry, Pete, they were messing around with adding an amendment to our bill, which makes the political intrigue heavier. And it caused some members of the Republican Party to get off. They had no problems with our part of the bill. But down there, an amendment got slapped on. And I'm confident we're going to pass our bill because they understand we have to have it. But nothing is easy, Blake, in that political environment. And thank God Jeremy's there. And he's as good as anybody in that building of trying to navigate that process. But it is just a very difficult environment to navigate.
But keep in mind as well, for especially the newer members, that it's been renewed already. So they know that were it not for their delays, we wouldn't need this. So.
I wanted to ask a question, and this may be more of a theoretical question, but our credit rating is something that we pride ourselves on, and at some point our capacity to borrow our rating will be impacted by increased borrowings. Do we have any feel for how much latitude we have before we may risk a rate change relative to our debt numbers?
We do meet regularly with the rating agency. Sometimes they just want to meet. We always take the meetings, even if we're not in the process of pursuing any borrowings. This does not require rating because it's a direct placement. But on everything else, we do a rating. So what we have heard, and this goes back 3-4 years ago, it's nothing new, is that short-term borrowing always is considered something that they look at in your long-term ratings. They know, there's language in there that in the actual rating report that they watch our short-term borrowing very closely, that it could be a credit negative, but that the RTA has managed through short-term borrowing and is only using it to address state delays. So they kind of like talk about it, but they don't slam you for it. That said, I think being in the state of Illinois, and they recently shared this about a month ago or 2 months ago, that it's very hard for us to continue to have our AA rating, which is AA stable from 2 of them, and it's AA negative the last time with 1 of them, when in a state that's, almost junk status. So they've said that they're looking at how that impacts all of the government entities in the area, and certainly them seeing the state delays, and we were actually getting a credit positive, not that it reflected in anything, because we were at our lowest amount of short-term borrowing, and of course now we're increasing it. So yeah, there's an impact. We just haven't seen it yet, and we'll continue to talk through them.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? If not, we've had some members added to the meeting since the last roll call, so we'd ask for a roll call.
Yes, and if the record would indicate that Directors Anderson and Melvin and Pang and Chairman Dillard have all joined us.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
We need a motion and a second.
I'm sorry, that would be nice. Motion and a second.
Second.
I'm sorry. Director Melvin, second by Director Lewis. Roll call.
Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director Buchanan?
Yes.
Director Colson? Yes. Director DeWitt? Aye. Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Troiani?
Abstain.
Director McGallis?
Aye.
We have 7 ayes and 1 abstention.
Thank you. Item 4B is an ordinance authorizing a capital amendment. Jill? This is, deals primarily or solely with Metro.
I got it. Yes, hi. Dave Spacek, the manager of the capital program, will do the presentation.
Thank you, Dave.
Good morning, Chairman Megales and members of the Finance Committee. My last presentation was most noteworthy for having a large number of acronyms, so this time hopefully I won't achieve that goal again for you today. I'll be presenting a special capital program amendment this morning at the request of Metro. My presentation will give an overview of the major funding and project changes requested. The primary reason that Metro has requested this special amendment is so they can reprogram state bond funds at IDOT's request to projects not currently funded with state bonds, can begin quickly, and can draw down the maximum amount of their state bond funding allocation by the end of the state fiscal year 2018. It should be noted that these are not new or additional state bond funds to Metro, but rather money that was originally programmed for other Metro projects in prior years. First, let's look at the proposed changes in sources of funding. As you can see from this chart, we have included requested funding changes to both the current 2017 capital program and the 2018-2021 out years of the capital program to provide a comprehensive overview of the proposed changes. As this chart shows, the total funding change to the 2017 capital program is a $79.33 million increase for Metro, driven by the increase of $56.43 million in reprogrammed state bond funds and an increase of $22.9 million in service board and local funds. The increase of $56.43 million in state bond funds, which as mentioned is not new state money to Metro, but rather reprogrammed state bond funds from prior years. The $22.9 million increase is from farebox revenue programmed for capital projects. As can be seen from the columns on the right, there are no proposed funding changes in the out years of the program. As mentioned, this program amendment will add to the 2017 capital program $56.43 million of reprogrammed state bond funds from prior years and $22.9 million of farebox revenue for capital projects. In addition, $10 million of the 2017 RTA bond funds and $18.52 million of service board funds will be reallocated from rolling stock rehabilitation programs to purchase new rail cars and locomotives. It is important to note that these reallocated funds are not new funds to the 2017 capital program, but rather a shift of 2017 funds between projects.
Dave, before you go off of this chart, that new farebox revenue for capital projects, that's something that we ought to make note of because it's something that Metro pledged that they were going to do with that new revenue, a portion of it.
That's correct.
It's a good thing that they're actually using it for capital. I mean,
That's correct.
Kind of a first.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. The proposed project changes to be funded are $26.43 million for continued work on Metro's rail car rehabilitation program, $30 million for continued work on Metro's locomotive rehabilitation program, $10 million for the purchase of new gallery rail cars, and $41.42 million for the purchase of new locomotives. In order to hopefully more clearly illustrate the movement of funds, the matrix on this slide indicates how the projects are impacted by the proposed amendment. As is shown, the $56.43 million of reprogrammed state bond funds will be taken from 14 station rehabilitation and miscellaneous station improvement projects system-wide and reprogrammed to Metro's ongoing locomotive and rail car rehabilitation program. As mentioned, the reason for this reprogramming is that IDOT has put a priority on funding projects with the remaining state bond funds that can be substantially completed by the end of state fiscal year 2018. Many of the station projects cannot meet this criteria. The reallocation of $10 million in RTA bond funds and the $18.52 million in service board funds programmed in 2017 from locomotive and rail car rehabilitation to the purchase of new rolling stock. This was made possible by the reprogramming of state funds to rolling stock rehab projects and Metro's reprioritization of rolling stock replacement. The addition of $22.9 million in Metro farebox capital then went to purchase new rail locomotives. That concludes my presentation. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Are there questions or comments? Yes, Director Lewis.
Dave, of the 14 station rehabs that are being taken off the grid, do you happen to know the locations of those stations?
Yes, I do. So they include, it's kind of a mixed bag because the state bond funding has been cut from an initial, across the board, from 2.7 billion down to 2.405 billion. So that was a cut to all the service boards. So there's a number of cuts that Metro was taking along the way. But the stations that are being taken off the table are going to be 79th Street, Melvin Park, Burr Oak, Romeoville, 59th Street, Rehab, 63rd Street, Calumet, Peterson, River Forest, Blue Island, Mokina, Hickory Creek, Hubbard Woods, Racine, Mayfair, Grayland, and then some system-wide station improvements. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to happen. They may use other funds. There just aren't state funds available, bond state funds available for these projects this time.
The reason I ask is because one of the things that had been stated before is a lot of the stations on the South Suburban and Metro electric lines were in bad need of repair, and so I just wondered, proportionately, is that something that you're looking at to say across the board? Are we trying to do this with some proportionality, or is there a disproportionate number that are occurring that happen to be on those two lines?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's disproportionate. We can get you the list of all the station projects that are happening. These just happened to be programmed years ago and the funding never was realized. So I think geographically, looking at this list, I think it's kind of spread out throughout the region, but we can do that analysis and get back to you.
Yeah, I know we've had some commentary, particularly at the, this is at the Cook County level about that particular line, so I just appreciate making sure we are being even-handed in what's done there.
Right, definitely. I'll get back to you.
Other questions or comments? If not, roll call. A motion and a second. I would like to make a motion and a second. Motion by Director Colson, second by Director Anderson. Thank you. Roll call.
Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director Buchanan?
Yes.
Director Colson? Yes. Director DeWitt? Yes. Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Traiani?
Yes.
Director McGallis?
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you. Are there any other items to come before the committee? If not, a motion to adjourn. Motion by Director Traiani, second by Director Lewis. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Nays? Ayes have it. Committee's adjourned. Thank you.
Microphone, please.
Sorry about that. We'll call the meeting the Compensation and Human Resources